Yeah, you take a seat there. Be good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this event here in Washington, D.C., hosted by the Asia Society and the Asia Society Policy Institute. It's good to see so many friends here from across the public policy community here in Washington, D.C., many excellencies from diplomatic missions who I recognize in the audience, and others interested in the wonderful world of finance, which brings us to our principal guest here today, my good friend and colleague, President Jin Liqun. Before I introduce him formally, I'd simply like to acknowledge those of our senior office holders of the Asia Society, Henrietta Fore, who is here, who's co-chairman. Stand up, Henrietta, everyone knows you, of the Asia Society. Josette Sheeran, who is the president of the Asia Society. And Wendy Cutler, who is vice president of the Asia Society Policy Institute, who heads our operations here in Washington, D.C. I've known Jin Liqun for quite some years. In fact, before of us any heard the words or the letters AIIB. We have been friends in China for some time and have worked together on an institution called the International Finance Forum of China well before the AIIB came into being, even as an idea, let alone an institutional reality. Today, of course, as of January this year, the 16th of January, President Jin has been formally appointed by the board, not by the government of China, by the board, 57 member states, as the president of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And this is the first occasion which he's been in Washington, D.C. in that formal capacity. And President Jin, you are a welcome guest here at the Asia Society and in Washington. Of course, he is no newcomer to the world of finance. For those of you familiar with his curriculum vitae, it's an impressive one. Prior to this position, of course, President Jin was chairman of the China Investment Capital Corporation Limited, which was China's first joint venture investment bank. From 2008 to 2013, he was chairman of the supervisory board of the China Investment Corporation. Prior to that, from 9 till 12, Mr. Jin served as the deputy chairman and subsequently chairman of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, an international body. From 03 to 08, he was vice president and then ranking vice president of the Asian Development Bank. He's also served 6 years with the World Bank, if I'm correct on that, Liqun. And prior to that, for a long period of time, was with the Chinese Ministry of Finance, in fact, ending up as Vice Minister of Finance for that institution before he then went into international financial institutions. But what really arrests your attention about Jin Liqun is that prior to all that, he's an MA in English Literature at the Beijing Institute of Foreign Languages. I'm always impressed by Renaissance men, women, and persons who have a multiplicity of skills and interests. And Jin Liqun is one such person. He has a fascination for Shakespeare, a deep knowledge of Shakespeare. He reminded me before that, in fact, Julius Caesar is not a history play. He reminded me before that Macbeth is not a history play, but his passion is the history plays, such as Richard III and the rest. And we'll hear more of that in a minute. He's also a student of English poetry, and in fact is the co-author, I think, Liqun, of what is the standard text in Chinese language on the history of English poetry, an anthology of English poetry. So there you have it. I challenge all of you to find someone currently leading a global financial institution who has, shall I say, a humanities breadth apart from a fascination with what we call the dismal science, otherwise called economics. Perhaps that's how you keep afloat in life and remain spiritually alive in what can be otherwise a deeply distressing business, economics and finance. So our format today is very simple. I intend to engage President Jin in conversation about some of the questions concerning the establishment of the bank and its future operations, etc. And then, in half an hour or so, I'll throw it open to questions from the floor. Because we are being broadcast live through webcast, can I suggest that before you ask your question, wait for a microphone to come in your direction so that we can get your name, rank and serial number and then proceed with the dialogue. Please welcome President Jin Liqun. So President Jin, let's begin where all good conversations begin, Shakespeare. And you told me before you're a big fan of the history plays. Why is that the case?
You know, when I was working in China, in rural China for a good 10 years, from 1968 to 1978, when I was enrolled in the graduate programs in Beijing, you know, what should I do over 10 years when the schools were dismantled? I was very lucky to have access to quite a number of English books. You know, I couldn't aspire to be a physicist or chemist, you know, expert because you need, you know, labs, you know. So I only have a couple books, right? So I happened to be able to read quite a number of books about history, actually. The American history, European history, and also, of course, the literature. I remember I read Paul Johnson's A History of an American People. The first page will tell you, America has all the problems on the table, but they always address all these problems. That's the spirit of the United States.
All the problems on the table, but addressing all the problems.
They don't hide or cover them up, okay? They don't sweep all this problem under the carpet. We have a problem, we will address it. So I was very much touched. And, you know, you asked me what's my favorite place of Shakespeare. Actually, it's very hard to say which is the favorite. With certain people say we love Hamlet. I think in Hamlet, one passage is very important. Because when young Hamlet saw his uncle was having a drinking spree, and then he said, though I'm native here and to the manor born, it's a custom to be honored on the breach than the observance. If you find something bad, you get rid of it, even though it is the accepted custom. So, though I'm native here and to the manor born, it's a custom, drinking is a custom, to be honored on the breach than the observance. So he's a reformer. Shakespeare's a reformer. And you all know, for instance, you asked me what are my favorite plays. I think histories. Why I love histories? Because histories will tell you lessons. Histories will teach you, will show you how to avoid mistakes which were made repeatedly by the humans over the centuries. So, Richard III. Richard III was not that bad, actually. Shakespeare demonized him, but he certainly had problems. So you can avoid the problems of Richard III. And King Henry V.
Did Richard III need a better public relations company? Or?
Now, if you, I'm sorry to say you, if somebody does not behave, I don't think public relations would help that much.
It's true.
Right? But if you really do your job well, people would be convinced you're a good guy, and people would respect you. You don't need, I would not spend a lot of money on the public relations department. When we do lousy things, nobody would believe you, even though I hire you as the, you know, spokesperson for this institution.
I'm not available.
You know, anyway, I think it's very much important for you to understand. There are so many mistakes in this world that humans would make. Don't repeat the same mistake again.
Well, taking that principle of learning from history, you're a new global financial institution. You've already got 57 member states signed up. You've got $100 billion worth of paid-up capital. It's not a small start. It's a significant start. But learning the lessons of history, as others have asked before, and you look at the evolution of the other multilateral development banks, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, places where you've worked before, what are the historical lessons you've picked up from them which can be applied productively to the future of the institution you now head?
First of all, we have to be very positive on the Bretton Woods institutions, on ADB, EBRD, EIIB. All of these institutions have contributed so much to development and poverty reduction over the decades. Okay? They have gained a lot of experience for a new institution like AIIB to learn from. But on the other hand, those institutions were created 7 decades ago, half a century ago, quarter century ago. They were created under different historical circumstances. And we are created in this new age. So if over the decades there were some problems, some mistakes, that was understandable. But if we commit the same kind of mistakes, it is a serious problem. So we have to understand this. Learning from each other for a newcomer, for a new arrival in the MDB family, I said this is new sibling. I think we have to pick up whatever is a plus in those institutions and avoid what is minus.
You've described them before, or your relationship with them, as a sibling relationship. Now, I know a little bit about sibling relationships, and sometimes they're fine. Sometimes there's a little bit of sibling rivalry. And sometimes there's the occasional argument, but you're all still part of a broader family. So how are the sibling relationships going? You've just spent the morning with Jim Kim from the World Bank. You put out a statement about a co-investment framework between the two institutions. So tell us what's going right, and if there are any difficulties, tell us that as well.
I would say a huge amount of chemistry has already been nurtured between AIIB and the World Bank, AIIB and ADB. And otherwise, we couldn't possibly sign this kind of agreement. But you see, it's very much interesting to note that if you look at the global economy 7 decades ago, it's very small, right? And when ADB was created half a century ago, the economy grew. Now it's even bigger. So there's vast room for cooperation. So I said, no worries about stampeding. Too much space for you to work together. Actually, if we all believe over the next decade, the pent-up demand for infrastructure could be as high as 10 trillion. Nobody can supply that kind of capital. We have $100 billion, a poultry, a drop in the bucket. So no worries. We do not really have to compete, and there's no actually a possibility for us to compete. There's only cooperation and competition, cooperation and coordination. For instance, by definition, infrastructure projects are very large. Easily, you will have $1 billion, $2 billion, or $3 billion. And it's very risky, and it probably is not financially feasible for one institution to pour the resources in this project. So we work together. When we work together, we can actually help the host country to improve its macroeconomic policy environment, because all of these multilateral institutions are, you have a huge political clout to play a big role. And for instance, World Bank is financing a road project in Kazakhstan, and a power project in Pakistan or Indonesia, India. So we work together. That's why we believe it's really important. And we would also like to invite private sector companies to join us.
Well, just on that private sector question, I looked at a statement made by President Xi Jinping on the day that you were launched in Beijing formally, which was in 16th of January this year. He said, "The founding and opening of the AIIB will effectively boost investment to support infrastructure development in Asia. It will serve to channel more resources, particularly private investment, into infrastructure projects to promote regional connectivity and economic integration." So I suppose I've got two questions there. One is, how are you going so far in your relationship or evolving relationship with private capital markets? And secondly, in the actual definition of infrastructure, how do you conceive of what the scope of infrastructure is, given its purely economic? Is it economic and social infrastructure? Is it a cocktail of the above?
We have to prioritize. I mean, by working together with other MDBs, we can pick the very, very good projects which can meet our standard: financially sustainable, environmentally friendly, and socially acceptable. So we have harmonized the policies, the environmental protection and resettlement, so we can work together. But then the private sector resources can also be mobilized for a very good reason. You see, Asia is awash in liquidity. Asia's savings is very high, but Asia is lacking in a kind of mechanism to recycle all these resources. So when we work together, we can help the Asian savings to be better utilized. Now, private sector can participate in various ways. They could certainly join in the financing directly. When I was in charge of the World Bank borrowings in the 1990s, we had a power plant financed by the World Bank and banking syndication. The commercial banks have a syndication, and they would pick up the early maturity, first 5 years, they leave. And then we would pick up the later maturity. Very good cooperation. And a standard pattern of fundraising of the multilateral development institutions is to float the bonds. You use the proceeds of the bonds to finance projects. So we can raise funds from the Asian market, from China, okay? And obviously, a rising tide lifts all the boats. A more developed Asia means more business for financiers, for banks, non-banking financial institutions, and of course, for the manufacturers. So private sector participation is important, and it can, I think it comes in various ways. So we highlight the importance of cooperation with all partners, as long as they are willing to help promote the Asians' development, and certainly they would stand to benefit from this process.
So your assessment so far is that private capital markets are keen and interested in what you're about to do?
You see, of course, but I'm looking actually beyond the infrastructure investment. Asia is actually a fragmented market, not as well integrated as the European markets. First of all, the goods market is not that integrated, and to say nothing of the fact that the assets market is even more fragmented. So when we promote infrastructure development, when we develop Asia's economy, probably we can have a better integrated market, and Asian countries could catch up in the regional integration. And of course, the connectivity in the vast Eurasia land is good news for European countries. Now, taking advantage of this opportunity, I like to differentiate between AIIB and One Belt, One Road. One Belt, One Road is also initiated by the Chinese leader. One Belt, One Road covers many countries. If we have very good projects, we can really have a well-connected Eurasia, okay? And also maritime connectivity. But AIIB is not created exclusively for One Belt, One Road. We have to take care of the countries which are not part of the One Belt, One Road. We must be fair to all of the member countries. Now we have emerging market economies of the Asian region, and now emerging market countries also, for instance, South Africa, Brazil, Egypt, and some other countries are North Africa, some African countries are on the waiting list. So we would finance infrastructure projects, all of the emerging market economies of this bank. They do not belong to One Belt, One Road, but they deserve the support of this institution. So that is the differentiation, and also the relationship connectivity.
And on the definition of infrastructure, classic infrastructure, power generation, power transmission, power distribution, classic infrastructure being ports, roads, and the rest. But as I understand it, you're looking at a wider definition of infrastructure as well. I think gathering here and around the webcast audience would be interested to hear what the scope is.
Yeah, very broad. We don't want to confine ourselves to a very narrow definition of infrastructure. That's why the mandate is to finance infrastructure and other productive sectors, leaving much room for maneuver for this bank in the years ahead. For instance, after we do a lot in providing financing for physical infrastructure, we could provide financing for non-physical structure. Health, in my view, is very much important, particularly with the aging population of this region. And education is important, certainly. And I don't know whether you can define digital connectivity as non-physical or physical. I think it's fuzzy. The dividing line is very fuzzy.
If you're going to dig a trench and put a cable down, it's physical.
I told my friends during lunch, I said, when I was vice minister in charge of education, I visited some remote areas in China. I happened to listen to a class. The teacher was teaching English, working very hard. The students were working very hard. But I didn't understand a single English word they pronounced except the local name. You see? How could you do that? But later on, we tried to develop a digital connectivity. The students are not supposed to teach students to pronounce English words or Mandarin. They just play this CD-ROM, or they just turn on the education channel. They just do some kind of help, kind of tutorial. And the students can learn from the first-class teachers, not just in China, in the whole world, because there's some foreigners, native speakers, who are teaching English. So this is very important. This is connectivity. Should be, I think, done in so many poor countries, low-income countries, because I believe education is the key.
The key element then in the definition of infrastructure, apart from its economic and social utility, is against the bankability of a project will still be its capacity to generate a revenue stream, to service the business model around the investment. Is that correct? It's still got to be able to generate a revenue stream.
You see, it's very interesting to note when we talk about meeting the pent-up demand, it seems that if we can meet all the needs, if we can finance all of the projects, that's great news. No. If we could finance all of the projects, it could be a disaster. You can be selective. If you are given 10 projects, you do it. I think it's a huge waste. But if you can finance only maybe 3, 4 out of the 10 proposed to you, you are doing a great job. You can avoid a lot of wastes. Infrastructure projects could be wasteful if they are not well coordinated. The demand is one thing. Whether it's feasible is another. So I don't think it is right for us to just meet all these needs for the next 10 years. We give them 10 trillion US dollars. That's a disaster. I don't like it. We have to be selective. We have to be sure what you do would, as I said, meeting 3 basic requirements, right? Otherwise, we won't do it. So now, early in the stage, we work with the World Bank, for instance, in financing some of the projects, and because of the harmonized policies, we can do it. Give you one example. I don't want to name any country. I don't want to name any country for obvious reasons. We were approached by some of the project sponsors in some of the countries to finance a very important infrastructure project, transport project. We declined. You know why? Because the World Bank pulled out. AIIB pulled out because of corruption involved. So they came to AIIB. They say, you are different. If they refuse, you should do it. Because we say we do different things and we do things differently. But you see, if the corruption is involved, I'm sorry, we cannot do it. So please understand, cooperation is important, but we all cooperate on a very good basis. If the World Bank or AIIB or EBRD reject some project because of the corruption or because of environmental problems, we have to explain to some of the project sponsors. Unless you improve, it's very hard for us to be involved.
So you've talked about the AIIB as being clean, lean,
And
and
green.
green.
Yes.
Okay, because you're a poet.
But we are not mean.
So you're into
okay?
rhyme.
I'm frugal. I'm stingy, but I'm not mean.
I was just emphasising your poetic skills. You know, clean, lean, green. As long as there's rhyme, rhythm, and metre, it makes poetry. Well, sort of. So tell us about governance standards. The critics of the AIIB, before it came into being, raised questions around the world about what the governance standards would be of this institution. How's it going? How are the governance rules? How's the board feel about its initial 3 months? Are you confident that you'll be able to, as you've said to me privately, exceed the standards of governance that you've seen in other multilateral development institutions?
You see, the designing of this institution has been the work of a very, very strong team. We have quite a number of American professionals of the highest caliber, and they've been working very hard creating the basic documents of this institution. And they have years of experience working in the World Bank, in AIIB, and we also have secondment from the EBRD and the AIIB. So this is the product of so many experts with years of experience working in other institutions. That's something we should never ever forget. And I make a point of learning from the public institutions, the MDBs, and learning from the private sector companies. So we would create a new institution which is still multilateral development institution. Otherwise, we are not of this family, okay? However, we must make sure that the gene of this MDB should have some positive mutation. So this is going to be a different species, even though we are still an MDB. So if we are widely different from the MDBs, we cannot be called a multilateral development institution. But if we are exactly the same, the clone of the World Bank, clone of AIIB, we lose raison d'etre. So it's a combination of the strong features of both. For instance, we don't have the resident board. The Bretton Woods institutions and those institutions which copied them were created 7 decades ago, half a century ago. Today, with a click of mouse, you get all the information. Okay, we could have communication with the board members on an ongoing basis. They don't have to stay on the premises of AIIB without losing the flow of information. Now, for the first 3 months, we have tried our very best to keep them informed. We have the executive committee meeting. We provide information to the board. We tell them what's going on with the recruitment, what's going on with regard to preparation of the pipelines, and some directives, not major policies. And we tell them we are preparing for instance, an energy policy, and you should think about this when we discuss this in the next board meeting. So we should take advantage of the modern technology. If the board members could be informed on an ongoing basis, we can save direct cost by 15 to 20%. Now we have 60 people so far.
Did you say 15 to 20%?
15 to 20%.
By not having a resident board.
Yeah, that's right, by not having a resident board.
Okay, World Bank shareholders, have a listen to that.
If you look at the private companies, none of them have resident board, none, because the board members hire professionals, and the professionals have to do a good job. If they fail, they will be kicked out. No nonsense, right? But if the resident board approve the policies and also approve the specific investment projects, if anything goes wrong, you cannot kick out the management because the management didn't approve it. But you cannot kick out the board because the board can never be kicked out. So who is held responsible? Nobody. That's the vacuum of responsibility. We want to change that. So when we worked on the European countries, I told them, actually, we are asking for troubles because we are not simply asking for the right or authority to make decisions on our own. We have to be held accountable and responsible. If somebody makes serious mistakes in judgment, to say nothing of corruption, should be kicked out. No nonsense. But if the board approves that, if anything happens, you did it. It's not my responsibility. So that's why the private sector company board who really owns the institution will never ever be making decisions on the specific investment projects because they hire the professionals. The professionals' responsibility is to deliver, to make this institution grow. Otherwise, you're out, right?
So going where the rubber hits the road, and I'll then turn questions to the audience after this one. You're 3 months into your operation. You've got $100 billion worth of paid-up capital. When do you expect to close your first project financially?
We are working with the World Bank and AIIB for co-financing. Maybe in June we could have a couple of projects approved by the World Bank, by AIIB, and by us. We are also processing freestanding projects prepared by our professionals on our own. So we could have a batch of projects, both the freestanding and co-financing projects. But even in the longer term, even we build up our capacity, we can process projects on our own. I still believe we should work together to do co-finance for the reasons I talked to you about, because infrastructure projects are very large. And it's not a very good idea for one bank to spend $2 billion or $3 billion in one project. That's not a very good idea. See?
So developing your own pipeline of bankable projects, but also sharing the pipelines with the other existing institutions.
And cost sharing. We can cut costs on both sides.
Sounds smart to me. Now over to the audience for questions. Stanley, I can see you up there. And there's going to be a microphone come to you. And please self-identify. And I'll try and be as fair, as impartial as possible. Keep the unilateral statements down and the questions as sharp as possible. Yeah.
Stanley Roth, recently retired. Assuming a sane administration comes into power in the U.S., either party, and I know that's not a safe assumption, but assuming it is, it will presumably want to join the AIIB. I think it's widely recognized, with perhaps the exception of a few in Treasury, that the United States made a mistake the first time around. What would your reaction, the bank's reaction, board be to an application from the U.S. government?
From the very beginning, we are engaged United States government officials and the private sector in sharing information, our perspectives about this bank. I understand different countries have different situations to deal with. I never said it was a mistake. We have 30 countries on the waiting list. They didn't join as founding members. Can you say they made mistakes? Of course not. Even if a country chooses not to join, you cannot say that country made a mistake. I don't think so. Regardless of the membership of any country, given our policies, we have ample room for cooperation. We have universal procurement. American companies can participate in the international competitive bidding. As you know, we have already benefited from American professionals working in our institution. So we don't look at the people's passport. We look at their credentials, qualification. So given these two important policies, the Americans will never be excluded from this institution's business. Actually, I'm addressing the meeting of U.S. Chamber of Commerce right after this, okay? So please do not say this is a kind of mistake. But I would say probably some country would miss the opportunity if not working with AIIB or AIIB-related businesses. That's what I should say, right?
Just on that, before we go to the next question, It must have been a fascinating internal policy exercise within China itself to come up with this proposal. And Evan Medeiros was here earlier on and said this, that, where's Evan, a distinguished, a senior fellow at Asia Society Policy Institute, that China, which has historically not done this sort of thing, comes up with this particular proposal to create not a multilateral, but let's call it a plurilateral investment institution, a bank. Must have been a pretty fascinating internal debate you had on that. Reveal all.
You see, very interesting. As I said, if China had not initiated this bank, some other countries would do because of the need for infrastructure development. And China wants to play a big role as the responsible member of the international community. China wants to contribute in a more effective way to the regional and global integration, and also the economic development in Asia and elsewhere. So that's I think a very good idea. And also, China wanted to do something which has never been done before, learning from its own experience of its own development, also overseas investment. So some people question the motivation of China. Why do you do this? What are you up to? What do you really want? All these kind of questions are quite natural, and I would say questions like this occur because they probably saw some of the issues, some of the controversies about China's investment overseas. Any country would make mistakes. Any company would make mistakes. But I think China would have a wonderful opportunity to showcase its willingness to contribute. And this is the idea. So when I was asked by somebody, a news correspondent said, do you think AIIB is a great success of Chinese diplomacy? I said, yes, it is, of course. But I would add, it's the success of the diplomacy of all of the 57 countries, not just China.
Dan Street from the IFC.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I'd like to touch on leveraging the power of the private sector and how important it's going to be for governments, international finance institutions, and major companies to work much more closely to reduce investor uncertainty. In your experience, what mechanisms, policies do you think work best to reduce risk, uncertainty, and are there any new platforms that you'd like to see in place to reduce investor risk and uncertainty?
Thank you. Actually, risk mitigation is a very tough issue because it involves all those who are involved in the decision-making process. You do a project, infrastructure project in a country. It could be, you could have risk factors related to the macro policies of that country. It could be also the risks on the part of the investor, such as a multilateral development institution. So we take this very serious. That's why I have created a position, the vice presidency, for risk management. An otherwise good project could be a big failure because of the neglect to some of the risk factors. As I said, a development project could be very much complicated, particularly infrastructure investment. It has a long gestation period. What is the risks? You may find a project almost bankable. For instance, land acquisition for a railway, okay, or for a hydropower stations. The last mile can kill you. Unless you really have solved all of the land acquisition problems, people are properly settled, compensated for, you go in, you will be killed. But that might be related to the risk issues of that particular host country. But it's also the responsibility of the MDBs, why don't you work this out? Why didn't you, before you step in? From the perspective of the MDBs, I think the risks are related to macro policies. For instance, you process a project which is a very good one, but after the project is completed, the political leaders want to get re-elected, and then they try to, for instance, reduce the tolls of the roads, power tariff, making an otherwise perfect project a failure.
Yep.
You know, these kind of risks. When I was in AIIB, I did a project in Afghanistan, in the post-conflict country. Everybody from the European countries said, risky, risky, risky. Then I said, I made 3 points. Any project is risky, even in a major development country. Secondly, in Afghanistan, if AIIB is not there, who else? Thirdly, I'm ready to lose money in this project, but I'm not going to be a problem, create a problem for our capital. Capital would be unimpaired. I would cover the loss by the profits I made in China. So the project was finally approved. It was a smashing success. It was a telecommunication project. As you know, even Taliban needed telecommunication, right? But later on...
I don't think we say that here.
No. They didn't blast the power transmission towers. That's true. But finally, they knock out 3. They say, we are still here. You know, you see, but the government wanted to nationalize that project. So I told them, you're killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. Now, if it were not AIIB, a multilateral institution, if it were a private sector company, probably it would be nationalized. But those risks are everywhere. So I think the multilateral development institutions should work very closely with the government for risk mitigation.
Further questions? I'm keen for some gender equity. The lady in red.
Thank you. Zhao Yingfeng, reporter from Unitium Media, Hong Kong. Welcome back to DC, Mr. Jin. My question is on Taiwan. Other than following the Hong Kong model and having the China's Ministry of Finance to apply on Taiwan's behalf, is there any other ways for Taiwan to join AIIB with the dignity it wants? Thank you.
You see, we have the Articles Agreement, and the Articles Agreement was agreed upon by all of the founding members. So I think there could be some way to deal with some of the economies which are non-sovereign based on the Articles Agreement. So Articles Agreement has paved the way for the membership of some of the economies which are non-sovereign.
And remember, in the APEC evolution, which is not a financial institution, it's an economic cooperation body, we did manage to shape that several decades ago in a manner which economies can participate. And Taiwan has been there virtually from the beginning. Over here, gentleman, yes, with the grey hair.
Barry Wood, RTHK in Hong Kong. Could you elaborate a bit about your relations with the BRICS Bank and possible overlap and cooperation?
You see, the New Development Bank, which is the proper title for the BRICS Bank, is not called BRICS Bank, it's called New Development Bank. And to my knowledge, New Development Bank also would like to expand its membership. BRICS Bank, this New Development Bank would first, I think, probably invest in the 5 member countries, and then they can go beyond the 5 member countries. So in this regard, we could have opportunities for cooperation if they invest in Brazil, South Africa, Russia, India. The only difference is that we are not going to finance major projects in China, because China would not borrow from this bank, at least not significantly. China wants to reserve the right, but try to give the resources to other emerging market economies. So that's the difference. We can still work together. And I expect a new development bank also to work with the World Bank, EBRD, AIIB or something, you know. It's possible. Thank you.
The gentleman to the left there. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jin, and thank you for your wonderful speech on AIIB and its future. And I would like to have a comment on your statement on Taiwan's participation in AIIB. And I would like to refer to the Articles Agreement, Article 3, Paragraph 2, and Taiwan is eligible to AIIB membership because this paragraph states AIIB is open to the members of International Bank of Reconstruction and Development or the Asia Development Bank. So Taiwan was a founding member of the ADB, Asia Development Bank, in 1966. So Taiwan intends to join the AIIB as a full member based on its membership of the ADB. And Taiwan would like to join the AIIB to fulfill its international responsibility to provide development assistance. So this is Taiwan's position.
I think we got the thrust of the question, mate. Yeah, over to you.
You see, the Articles Agreement, you refer to paragraph there, yeah. Membership is open to the members of the World Bank and ADB. So it's very clear about the possibility. But I think if Taiwan is interested in joining, there could be a solution following some of the procedures and rules. We would discuss the procedures for accepting new members very soon, actually in the next board meeting. We will discuss the procedures and the board of directors would agree on the procedures. So let's see what's going to happen. But anyway, the Articles Agreement has paved the way for the membership of the members of the World Bank and ADB.
Questions over here. Sir, you have to, yeah.
Hello, Winsor Robertson with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And
Sorry, where were you from?
The Natural Resources Defense Council.
Good, okay.
And I wanted to ask about some of the tensions involving the AIIB being lean, clean, and green, specifically with countries that want to do infrastructure projects with natural resources, and it might not be the best for climate change mitigation, but is the only resource they have on hand. And China, as you well know, is a champion in terms of trying to help combat climate change. And perhaps coal exports or coal processing plants. I'm wondering what you're thinking about this and what the board is thinking about this and whether there are any opportunities for future changes towards environmental policy.
We would certainly promote a green economy. With regard to energy strategy, we will prepare that and for the board to discuss. So I cannot jump to any conclusions about AIIB's financing of the power projects in this area, what kind of power project we finance. But generally speaking, I would say if we finance a power project, they should certainly have new technology to reduce emissions or deal with the sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide. And the net reduction should be the objective. For instance, if a country knock out the polluting, smaller polluting, inefficient power plants and build supercritical power plants, certainly that's net reduction. And we also pay attention to improving the power grids transmission. You see, in some of the countries, developing countries, the systemic loss could be as high as 30%, whereas developed countries like the United States, Nordic countries, the systemic loss is as low as 3%, even lower than 3%. So you don't have to build many new power plants, just improving the power grids, transmission, distribution you virtually create more powers. So that is very, very good. I think very much important. To say nothing of the fact that we will finance renewable energy projects on their own, right? And if we promote mass transit systems, we can provide transportation to the people without the need to drive individual cars. That also would be conducive to the reduction of emissions. So there are various ways by which you can go green.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, folks. So I see a young woman up the back there. That's you. And I see this gentleman here. So can I perhaps ask your question, and then you yours, sir, and I'll ask Jin Liqun to respond to both of them. That's you. Yep. Yep, you. It's coming your way. I'd rather not a third question on Taiwan.
My name is Chi Fei. I'm representing Power Group Asia. I'm wondering, Ms. Jing, if you could talk about more about India's role in AIIB. Are there any projects that AIIB is particularly interested in India?
Of course, India is an emerging market economy and a very important member of this bank. We will certainly finance, infrastructure projects like roads, railways in India. But you see, I have a question, actually. They always ask me, what kind of projects do you have in the pipeline? I'm not worried about that. My priority from day one is to create a bank with a very good corporate culture. This is far more important than to prepare a couple of projects. Projects will be taken care of the people, by the professionals. So if we have very good corporate culture from day one, and we would have the best of the people to work in this institution, making sure we would implement the policies approved by the board. You don't have to worry about the projects, frankly speaking. No, it's very difficult for any institution to create a good corporate culture and maintain it. Now, we have very good governance structure in AIIB, and that's why I said we attach great importance to comply with this governance structure. So that is something I'm thinking about. How can we have very good cooperation with our board, which is non-resident? How can we have very good mutual trust chemistry between board and management? How can we make sure all of the professionals we recruit would be dedicated to the development in Asia and elsewhere? Then projects will be taken care of by all these people.
Last question, sir.
Yes, Director Jin, Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. The initiation of the AIIB and the Belt and Road has created a lot of optimism, a new direction towards infrastructural development. And I think it has led to the World Bank and the ADB concentrating a lot more in that direction than would otherwise be the case. And I think if we had a different economic situation, that would prove to be very beneficial for the future of mankind, to enter a world in which development then becomes the name of the game. But our world is much different. We have a financial system in which there is apparently around $2 quadrillion worth of debt, and the world GDP is something like $70 trillion. Unless we can do something about resolving this situation, all the good that's being done will not lead to the ultimate result. And given the fact that the G20 meeting is going to be taking place in Hangzhou this year, do you have any recommendations or any thoughts with regard to the possibility of reforming the system in such a way that it can begin to work and we can deal with this debt problem?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Is this the last question?
I've got one curly one for the very end.
Okay. G20 would like the MDBs to promote infrastructure investment given the obvious need. Indeed, in my view, infrastructure investment is important not just in emerging market economies, but also in developed countries. In many developed countries, there's a huge need for upgrading the infrastructure. So this is actually the request from the G20 meeting. and they certainly hope MDBs work very closely together. I do not believe that creating one institution could be doing quite a lot in improving the entire system. I think at least one new institution based on experience of the existing ones could be a source of inspiration for the existing ones, and we can work together to improve the entire system. So that is, in my view, very important for us to keep in mind, because some people were very much worried that creating AIIB would upend the existing financial system, which is certainly not true, which is not possible. They confuse two different concepts. One is the system, the other is components, okay, elements. By creating new elements, you cannot throw out the whole system. But of course, by working together, we can improve the system. So that is, I think, probably the role to be played, not just by a new bank, but by all of the existing institutions. So I think when we talk about cooperation between AIIB and EBRD or ADB or World Bank, we do not simply look at the financing of the projects. We can work together. How can we improve the responsiveness to the client countries? How can we better harmonize our policies? How could we both, or be all of us, more cost effective? And making the shareholders' money, taxpayers' money, go a long way. This probably would go beyond the so-called co-financing in a very narrow sense. And I'm looking at this, and that is why our conversation with all these institutions has been so fruitful and productive. Thank you very much.
As we close, I think it was Shakespeare, but you tell me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert and I'm not.
You are, probably.
No, not on Shakespeare. The, who wrote, one swallow doth not a summer make. Now, we're at the very beginning of the AIIB journey, and looking at the future of the regional and global economy, China's central role as an economy is a daily subject for analysis across this country and across the world. So, President Jin, what are you most optimistic about when it comes to China's economic prognosis for the next year to 2 years? And secondly, what worries you most?
The Chinese economy is on the cusp of major changes or reforms. Certainly challenges are very tough, but I don't think it is right to be doomsayers of the Chinese economy. Chinese economy, in my view, would be continuing to grow at a very high speed. By being high, I mean probably in the range of 6 to 7% for the next decade or so. There's no question about that. Indeed, when the Chinese economy slows down, going through the restructuring, it will be more sustainable, would be contributing better to the regional and global financial and economic stability. There's no reason for worries, and looking at the way the Chinese leaders are trying to restructure the economy, dealing with all of these issues. So if you find a government is fully aware of the challenges, you don't have to worry. The worst case is that there are a host of problems, but you just ignore them. But this is exactly what the Chinese government wants to avoid. So they are talking about challenges, difficulties every day, which means they are addressing these issues. Now, if we going full steam...
So they're like Americans, they put everything on the table. And
that's right. If Chinese economy continue to go at a very high speed, over 8 or 9 speed growth rate, you really have to be worried. So I think probably we are moving in the healthy range between 6 and 7. And dealing with the SOEs, dealing with social security problems, the gap between the rich and the poor, coordinated development between coastal areas and the hinterland provinces. Now all these kind of issues are being done. And also the anti-corruption, in my view, is very much important because the economy cannot be sustained when you don't have such a very good state governance. So I'm very much optimistic. You see, there have been so many doomsayers about Chinese economy, they proved to be wrong. So China, as the biggest shareholder, would be contributing to AIIB, and I think we should appreciate the efforts made by the Chinese government. One biggest contribution by the Chinese leaders is that they told us to run this institution by the highest possible standards.
I've got to say, as we can close, I've been studying China now for about 35 years. I probably have read about 30 to 40 reports over 35 years predicting the imminent collapse of the Chinese economy. So I've, by reason of experience, not just through habit, I treat skeptically any further report that the system's about to implode. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a great time with President Jin Liqun, who's been frank and open about the challenges he faces heading this new institution, frank and open about delivering on the governance expectations which he's been handed by his board and by the Chinese government. Please express your appreciation in the normal manner. Good.